Hey guys, today I want to run through my top 10 reads from the year so far. I have been able to read 70 books in 2023 so far, and these are my 10 favorite. Rather than try to rank them because they're all kind of different and I love them for different reasons, this is just going to be, hey, the order I read them in. This is my 10 favorites so far. So starting off, we have Project Hail Mary. This was a novel that my buddy had been trying to get me to read for forever, and I just hadn't gotten to it. And then I finally read it, and I freaking loved it. It was so good. It's by Andy Weir, who's the guy that wrote The Martian, and I read The Martian and I love that. And I for whatever reason, I hadn't gotten around to reading Project Hail Mary. And then when I finally did, I read like 100 pages of it the first night, stayed up way too late and was just like, this is so good. I love this. And so then I got done and I had my wife read it and she loved it too. And yeah, it's just one of those books that I'm like, I'm hard pressed to think of somebody that I wouldn't recommend this book too, just as a great fiction story that will just suck you in and keep you going. I know some of the people that I watch on YouTube kind of had some issues with some of the plot things and whatever. Honestly, I didn't even notice any of this stuff. I was just like, I'm along for the ride and I love it. And so that's by far been one of my favorite stories that I've read this year. Next up, we had The 5 Masculine Instincts. I did a whole top shelf episode about this. I gushed about this book for like 45 minutes. So you have probably heard me talk about it at this point, but it is my favorite book on Christian manhood ever. I think it's the best one. There's a video I'll put somewhere around here and you can go watch and hear all about that one. Next, I had Reader Come Home. I also did a top shelf episode on this book. This book just blew me away and brought to light this idea that has been wrecking me this entire year. And it's this understanding that the neural pathways that we use for deep reading are these neural pathways of critical analysis, reflection, and empathy. But the mind-blowing thing to me was this idea that these don't exist by default in our brains. And so we have to build them. And the way we build them, the only scientific way that we know of that we build them is through deep reading, but also the way that we maintain them is through deep reading. And so if we never learn how to do deep reading, or if we learn how to do it, but then we fall out of the habit of it, then what can happen is we'll literally lose the neural pathways for critical analysis, reflection, and empathy. That has just shaped my whole entire year since I read this book, with this urgency inside of me and this thing, which you've probably heard me say at this point now, but I'm like reading is not optional. We don't get the choice of like, oh yeah, but I'm not really a reader, like whatever. And I'm like, cool. Well, if you're not a reader, then you can't think critically. It's literally like scientifically impossible. The neural pathways don't exist. So you kind of don't get to not be a reader. Like you have to read and you have to learn how to read because it's actually critical to any kind of real success in life. And so this book has just stuck with me so much, and I've had so many conversations based off of that. And it's just one of those ones that I finished it, and the second I finished it, I wanted to go back and read it again. I just absolutely loved it. And that ties into another one that I'll talk about later on. But those two books, How to Read a Book and Reader Come Home, are stellar resources for helping you understand the why behind learning to read well, and then also the how to actually go about learning to read well. So we'll talk about that one in a second. Next up, we had The Body Code by Dr. Bradley Nelson. This book is one of the most transformational health books that I've ever read. I'm going to do a top shelf episode on this one as well. It is his follow-up book to a book called The Emotion Code. It is essentially about energy healing. And it sounds wacky, it sounds crazy, it sounds so out there, and it is one of the most impactful things that I've ever learned on a day-to-day practice of helping myself and helping my family live healthy and happy and deal with things that come up in our lives. Next up, we had Range. I have never felt more seen any day in my life than when I read Range. This is a book about people like myself who are jack of all trades, and it just brings to light so much truth in the value that people like myself bring and in the value that we have on teams, but also then individually in just our own knowledge. And it's so easy that there's been such a stigma against that. I feel like my whole life that I've always felt bad about being that way of like, oh, I need to become an expert in something or whatever. And I'm just like, I don't want to. I want to know a little bit about everything. And I just like, I get so bored if I'm just stuck here. I mean, just like look at my reading lists, for the months. Like I get so bored staying in the same thing. And so this book just radically shaped how I view myself and the positivity with which I view how I'm wired. Next up, we had The Count of Monte Cristo. I read this with my wife and I freaking loved it. I'd only ever read an abridged version of it, like way back in high school. The full version is honking, like it's a big boy. It took us like 4.5 or 5 weeks or something like that. But it was so good. I would literally recommend that to anybody. If you're even at all interested in reading it, you should 100% get the full version and read it because it is excellently done. And it literally, one of the beauties of that book is that it's so long, but you never want it to end. And like, you just kind of keep on like hoping like, oh man, you're like, oh man, it's getting close to the end. Like, I don't want it to end. I just want it to keep going because it's just written so well. So loved that one. Next up, we had Adorning the Dark by Andrew Peterson. I mentioned this in my monthly wrap-up video. Andrew Peterson is basically who I want to be when I grow up. The guy is massively talented, has done so many things, and is just a stellar human being. And this is his book about the artistic world and creating and what it looks like to be an artist and a songwriter and an author and all this stuff and how that looks like internally and what that looks like dealing with other people and the callings that God gives people within that and all this stuff. And just such great insight, such great thoughts, and such a great example to kind of strive towards for me, that where this is a guy who's really doing kind of his whole life is kind of what I want my life to be. And so it's really cool to be able to have that picture of somebody who's a little bit ahead of me talking about how he got there. And so, yeah, just absolutely love that one. Next up, we had Grant by Ron Chernow. I try at least once a year to read just the biggest biography I can find on different guys. And so this happened to be the one that I grabbed at the beginning of the year. And it just shocked me how much I didn't know about this guy who was like unbelievably successful and impactful, who just radically changed the history of the country in the time frame that he lived, and went from this like nothing, nobodiness thing to one of the most successful guys of his whole entire time. And his life story and the things that he went through and how he approached problems and how he approached opportunity and everything was just wonderfully fascinating to read, and was really insightful for me on the history of the Civil War, and especially the time kind of right after the Civil War and what that looked like, and how the civil rights movement was kind of happening then too. Like there's the civil rights movement that we all know about, but there was also this one like immediately after the war that was a huge deal, and all this stuff happened, and I just never heard of any of that before, at least that I could remember. And so that was incredibly fascinating to learn about and to kind of delve into. And Ron Chernow is just one of the best biographers out there. And so any book you can get by him, I guarantee is going to be good and going to be worth your time. So mine this year happened to be Grant. That's an excellent one if you're interested in that time period or in that man at all. I would highly recommend that one. Next up, we had Living Fearless by Jamie Winship. This is in combination with a sermon series that I heard from Jamie Winship. And this was literally the most impactful spiritual thing that I've ever learned, ever, I'm pretty sure. I don't think that's an overstatement. Jamie Winship's whole thing is what he calls identity exchange, and it's this idea of if we come to God and we confess, which is telling the truth. One of the big ideas that he shares is this thing that we think confession means saying I'm sorry, and it doesn't. Confession has nothing to do with saying I'm sorry. Confession has to do with telling the truth. And so one of the things that he says is that in modern Christianity, we're super horrible at just saying I'm sorry. And then when we tell the truth, we don't actually tell the truth. We tell what we think should be the truth, but it's not actually what's true to us right now. So instead of saying like, oh, I'm afraid and fearful right now, we go, well, I'm not supposed to feel fear as a Christian. I'm supposed to, be brave and all this stuff and whatever. And so I say like, well, like I'm not afraid, but I really am afraid. Like God hasn't replaced my fear with faith yet. And so, I'm trying to claim a thing that's not actually true to me yet. And so he has this whole thing of confession, which is telling the truth, repentance, which is hearing God speak back his truth about that thing, and then transformation and moving on from that. And this whole idea of all of it is that there's, within the context of all this thing, we can bring the truth of what we think about ourselves to God and ask him to speak, and God will speak to us, and he will tell us the truth about who we are. Not the truth that we think that is true about who we are, but the actual truth and the actual identity of what he gave us and who we are. And so I'm definitely going to be doing a whole big old video on this book, because it has been phenomenally impacting in my life, in Kim's life, and my brother's life, and some friends' lives, all of this stuff. It has radically shaped and changed how we just do life and are living out every single day of life. And so absolutely love this one. And then finally we had How to Read a Book. This is a book that my mom, I feel like I read because I talked about it with my mom so much, but I never actually read in school. And I always kind of had this like stigma of like, I don't need to read that. Like I know how to read a book. I read a crap ton. Like I'm fine. So I ended up picking it up because multiple people that I look up to, including Benjamin McAvoy here on booktube, we're just talking about how great of a book this is. And so I'm like, whatever, I'll pick it up and read it. And then I read it. And when I went to review this book on Goodreads, the only thing I could put in my review was just the word essential, of like, if you want to actually learn how to read, this book is essential. Like it just is. Everybody needs to read this book because it helps clarify and helps you realize the difference between reading to gain knowledge and reading to gain insight and wisdom, and the difference between reading and between reading well. It is just absolutely such a stellar book. Again, I'm going to do a full-on top shelf video about that because I just want to delve into this book for like an hour-long conversation. But that is a book that anyone who considers themselves a reader and wants to get any better at reading, that book needs to go at the top of your to-read list because it is just that good. It's so excellent. There you have it. Those are the 10 books that have been my favorite so far of the 70 that I've read this year. I would love to know what your guys' favorite books have been. And if you've read some of those, let me know what you think. If one of them really stands out and that you're planning on reading that one, let me know. We're just going to keep going. I'm going to keep posting videos. I'm going to keep reading. Make sure you're subscribed. That will show you when new videos come out. And I'm really trying to focus on building up this channel, being more consistent with my content, having better content to serve you guys. And so if there's stuff that you want, if there's content that you want from me, or books that you want me to review or stuff like that, please leave me a comment and let me know. I would love to talk with you guys. I love having the conversations. I love getting the recommendations and reading them and being able to reply back and all of that. And so I hope you guys are having a great day, and that's it. I'll see you in the next one.